Welcome back to the AFC South. I am your host, Mike Patton. And in case you kind of been under a rock, there's been some big news
Yeah.
in Houston. That would be Mr. Demeco Ryans becoming the next head coach of the Houston Texans. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on down the line. But of course, we do have to talk about the Houston Texans and the season that was and wasn't with Chalk Talks, Kim Y. Davis. What's going on?
Hello there. Happy New Year. I think this is the first time that I've seen you in 2023. So happy 2023 to you.
Thank you. Same to you. Same to you. Well, it wasn't a happy 2023 for a certain gentleman, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. Um, but the Texans, they did end the 2022 season in 2023 on a high note. They did win the last game against the Indianapolis Colts, which a lot of people thought they should have lost, but they did win the game and ended the season on a high note. So, what
Right.
did you think of the season that was when it came to the Houston Texans this year?
Well, clearly it was disappointing, right? You expected them not to be great, not even to be contenders, but to be, you just had hoped for something more. And, it just didn't pan out. The Houston Texans have the current roster as it sits today is devoid of a lot of talent. It's devoid of much talent. And you and I've talked about that a lot. We've talked about the fact that quarterback position is a real issue. And if you think about this, Mike, late in the season, the Texans had to go to deploy a two quarterback system to just try to produce some kind of offense, to get some kind of offensive production. That's not ideal. No head coach and offensive coordinator at this level wants to have to do that, but it speaks to the lack of talent, really, at that position. And it is, of course, the most important position in football, right? We hear about it. We look at what Mahomes did over the weekend. We talk about Jalen Hurts. We talk about you name it. Any team that's having success has a quarterback that doesn't hurt them. And oh yeah, if they're really competitive, makes them better. And the Texans didn't have that, and it showed. Even when the defense had some glimmers, some glimpses of hey, a flash of we got some takeaways. Offense just couldn't do anything. So it was rough. I felt bad for the players and also this coaching staff. Players don't get into the let's lose to get a draft pick. That's what fans and media talk about. Players and coaches not trying to lose for draft picks. They're competitors and they want to win. So it was tough.
Definitely tough to watch. I will say, past
Yeah.
the first game where the tie with the Indianapolis Colts, and then the win versus um the Jacksonville Jaguars. That was a good one. So I
Oh, and
definitely
they
enjoyed
beat
that.
the Titans in
Hmm.
Tennessee, and actually, of course, watched every game, but they had a lot of games where they were very competitive. They had a couple games. They only had two games where they just were never in it. With the Raiders, um, the second time around with the Jaguars, and the early game when they played at home against Tennessee. But all the other games, those are games that you're like they could have won those games. So it was disappointing in that regard because those players really wanted to win. So when you come down to the last game of the season and people go, oh, they should just lose so they can have the top draft pick. Well, I say if your personnel department is worth its weight in salt, you got the second overall pick, you ought to be able to come out of that with a good enough pick, a good enough player, a good enough quarterback to do something productive. You
Right.
shouldn't have to have the number one overall pick in order to be able to win. That's just me.
Right. I understand that one. So, of course, after that game, and plenty of people were still discussing whether the Texans should have won the game, Lovie Smith was relieved of his duties. I mean,
Yeah.
not even the next day, just that night. They just said, and then right after he had said in the press conference he expects to be the coach, and then boom, they let him go. So, what did you think of them letting him go just that quickly? What do you think kind of statement did that make about Lovey Smith or just the Texans organization?
So here's what I think, and I guess that feels like so long ago because so many things have happened. And you talked about a new head coach, and that's kind of where I am. But I will tell you, they were going to fire him. I'm glad they let him go right away because I was also here last year when they let David Culley the next day come out and do this final team meeting and this final interviews with the players, and then they fired him. That was disrespectful. So if you know you're going to fire him, just do it. I didn't see any reason to let him linger if the decision had been made, especially because the way they did it last year. I thought that was the right way to do it. If you're going to let him go, move on and be done with that. And so I agree with the fact that if they were going to fire him, they did it right away. But it was disappointing at that time that he didn't get longer. And I don't think any of us thought that Lovie Smith was going to be the long-term answer for this Texans organization. So I'm just glad that they stopped, kind of playing and make a decision, go out and get a coach that you think and expect is going to be with the organization long-term and give him time to build and see what he can really do. These last two coaches never had a shot. So
Now, question I have is behind the scenes. Of course, there's rumors out there about he kind of lost the team or things like that. Did you ever see any of that particular, type of rumor be reality?
So here's what I say. I don't think you lose a team and have guys go out and play on the last game of the season the way they did. That's not when you've lost a team. Is he everybody's favorite coach? Maybe not. But those guys were still showing up and playing hard. Nobody quit. I mean, you had the little incident with Brandon Cooks at a point during the season, but that was about something bigger than Lovey, right? Those guys showed up. Larry Tunzel, who I would say last season when he just never came back after he had this injury, whatever that was, he was playing, he was fighting, he was blocking during rushing plays, which was different. So to answer your question, no, I don't think he lost the team. And I think that's a narrative that's easy to say. But if you look at the way those guys play, guys don't play like that if they quit, if they're done, if they out. So no, I don't think he lost the team.
Gotcha. And another person that is going out more than likely is Pep Hamilton. Now he was a source of consternation for a lot of Texans fans that I witnessed. They basically were either they were like he's too conservative, or he's doing this, or he's doing. I mean, what was your thoughts on Pep Hamilton and the games he was calling?
So I thought Pep didn't have anything to work with, and I thought, you want him to be not as conservative, but with what? You know what I mean? I never understood that. I mean, I heard the calls like, he should do more. They had to piece together two quarterbacks to try to make something happen at that position. So I don't know how you do more when your quarterback, one, is turnover prone. Every now and then he had a good downfield deep pass, but he was limited. So I thought the criticism on Pep was unfair. I know I'm in the minority in that group. Should he have done more? I don't really know what. So I think he was conservative because he didn't really have any weapons. But he will listen. It was a dent for him, and you know how it is with black coaches. He was highly respected before, and hopefully there are people around the league that will remember and not think that all of a sudden Pep has forgotten how to coach and doesn't know football, because I think he still does, and hopefully he gets another opportunity to go somewhere else, and he will at least get a chance to be a quarterback coach. It may be a minute before he's a coordinator again, but who knows? I think he still knows the game, and that was just not a good situation at all.
Right. It was kind of frustrating to hear some of the criticisms about him, knowing what he had done in his past and things like that. It's frustrating to hear. And then with Lovey, he definitely went to a situation with one hand tied behind his back.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think this new head coach coming in which we're going to talk about in a minute. I think this is a referendum on the actual general manager and the executives if this doesn't work, in my opinion.
Yeah, listen. I've said I didn't think that the current general manager should be around to hire a third coach. I just didn't think so. I feel like yes, the roster was a problem. Now they, of course, you want to blame Deshaun Watson. That and Nick had nothing to work with in terms of the general manager. So if he had nothing to work with, what do the coaches have to work with? And you're the person who was charged with doing that one thing that you had to do: hire a coach. And if those coaches' performance was so egregious that they couldn't even warrant a second season with the roster that everybody knew was depleted, then how do you still get to be here? But he is, and so we move forward. The Texans move forward with Nick Caserio. I don't think he gets to hire another coach. You know what I mean? But I'm not sold on him. But you know, it's not my team.
Right, right. Now, of course, the head coaching search. They did talk to Mr. Mike Kafka, which is he's the New York Giants. I believe he's the offensive coordinator for the New York Giants.
Mhm.
Was there any things before the decision that they were specifically trying to look for that they had talked about looking for?
They talked about. We asked those questions at the night, the day after they fired Lovie, and they had a press conference. It was we want a leader of men. That's the thing that sticks out, and the person that can, you know, take the team to the next level. They wanted to get back to winning, so they didn't really specify specific things. There were many people who thought that they would go out and hire an offensive coordinator or an offense because their offense had been so bad. I didn't think that was necessarily what you had to do. And so I think they needed somebody that the fans could get behind. And you don't make a hire because of the fans, but listen, when you go to those games, those home games, there's nobody there. I mean, it's freezing in the stadium because you've got to turn on all the utilities and then you've got nobody in the building. I mean, that's a minor thing, but oftentimes it feels like there's more fans from the visiting team than from the Texans at NRG Stadium. That's a problem because I've covered this team when they didn't win previously and they still were able to get people to show up for the games. Like, that wasn't happening. So you got to win. Of course, you've got to win. They've got to do some things to get their fans back engaged. But to answer your question, I think they just, Demeco's energy, his reputation, his football IQ. He's clearly a leader of men. So many of his former teammates, even J.J. Watt's been very active on social media talking about, Demeco Ryans and his leadership. Chester Pitts, who played with him, so many guys who played with Demeco have come out and said, this is the guy. Like, he's the guy. You can't go wrong. And so I think there's just a lot of excitement, energy in this city right now about the hire of Demeco Ryans. Even the possibility of them hiring Demeco, but now that it's done, it's been pretty electric, if you will.
Okay. All right. So, of course, like you mentioned, 49ers defensive coordinator Demeco Ryans is their guy. 6-year deal is what's being reported. Honestly, of course, I honestly at first did not think he was going to go there because, of course, I was still thinking about the lawsuit, which someone brought to my attention. But, of course, that turned out not to be a factor at all per
Yeah.
reports as well. And, I just did not think he was going to be the guy.
So the lawsuit was about the field. I don't know if you
Hmm.
remember back when he played, that turf was really bad. There were several guys who got injured on the field. It was about the field. It wasn't so much a fight with the organization. And so I think people who weren't around and didn't cover the team back then or cover what happened, you can't sue the field. So you got to sue the team that the field belongs to. And so, but that was never an issue. I didn't know if he'd want to come here just because he had a lot of options, and obviously when they met with him, he likes Houston. He considered it home, although he's not from here. He's from Alabama. He played in Alabama, but he was drafted here. He spent several years here, liked the city, and was very connected to it. Said he and his family are excited to come back to Houston. This is a dream for him, and so I believe he had the leverage. And I hope he got the kind of deal that will give him an opportunity to be successful. And by that I mean, you already mentioned the 6 years, and I don't know what the number is. I'm sure at some point that'll leak out from somebody. I mean, some autonomy in terms of hiring his own staff, some input about, obviously, as it comes up for the draft. They've got high draft picks. They've got a nice size of space under the salary cap, and oh, by the way, the cap's going up this year. We just found that out yesterday. So they've got some resources, and hopefully in his deal, he got a chance to be definitely a part of making some of those decisions, because that will ultimately impact the team he's able to field and what he's able to do on the field. So I imagine he must have had that because he had options. He had options.
Right. Right. Speaking of one of those options, of course, the Denver Broncos, which I talked about earlier in the show. Denver Broncos, of course, they hired Sean Payton, which was funny because, Demeco Ryans was their first choice. He turned him down. Then they went back at him again, tried to make a run at him again. That's when they decided they were going to give up all those picks give up a first-round pick for Sean Payton, which, that was great for New Orleans because they didn't have a first round pick because that first round pick was in Philadelphia. So there you go. Works out for them.
Let me tell you, I don't know that I necessarily believe all those reports. Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter reported very different things about the Denver situation. So I'm not sure. I know that they were interested in Demeco. I know that he had kind of pulled his name out of that previously. And they've been talking to Sean Payton as well. One of the things Sean Payton said, he also interviewed with Houston. But remember when he started, he said, listen, I want to go someplace that has an established quarterback. So I never thought Houston was going to be the place for him, especially because you have to give up draft picks to get him. And Houston needs a lot of players. They need those picks. So for Sean Payton to come here knowing there's not an established quarterback, it's going to cost them some picks to get me, which will make it more difficult to give me the kind of roster I need. I just never thought that was a real option that he would actually come to Houston. But he talked to them, and if you're putting yourself back out there, that's the smart thing to do. And he's in Denver. I think both teams got the right hire. I think Sean Payton will be a good hire, a good fit for Denver, and I think Demeco Ryans is a great pick for the Houston Texans.
Well, one thing we know about Sean Payton, he knows how to coach a team that doesn't really have salary cap because, the New Orleans Saints never really had it. They had an imaginary salary cap. But, kind of in the show, definitely want to talk about it. This is the third black head coach in a row that the Houston Texans have hired, which if you didn't, I just want to know if somebody had that on their bingo card. If they did, they need to go play the lottery right now. So,
really remember before that, they had Romeo Crennel as the interim when they fired Bill O'Brien.
Right.
Romeo finished the season as the interim. And so, it's easy to talk about this team and say, man, they fired these two head coaches, two black coaches 2 years in a row. And that stands out, right? And then they hired Demeco Ryans, who's also African-American. I thought that they didn't get the last two guys, whether they had been two African-American coaches or somebody else. I just didn't think they gave them a fair shot. I don't think that they were ever put in a position to be successful. David Culley was not a long-term hire. They could have kept him for the second year, right? There was no reason to fire him last year for what you had to work with, And so all we can say is those were two very costly, poor decisions by the organization. And when I say poor, I'm talking about how they handled it, right? Bring in a coach that you're not committed to long term, and you're not committed to long term. And so And if you get an opportunity to coach, you're going to go in and say, hey, you know what? I'm going to give it my best shot. I'm going to turn it around. I'm going to be here. That's what anybody taking those positions would say, I'd imagine. And so the Texans got some justifiable criticism about those moves. And you know what, Mike? Many people compare it. I was doing maybe a local show, or maybe it was in another market, a TV show. And another guest said, well, the 49ers fired two coaches 2 years in a row. Yes, they did. And after they fired the second coach, they also got rid of the general manager. That general manager didn't get to hire the next coach, which happens to be Shanahan. And the general manager happens to be John Lynch. So yes, it has happened, but it's not the same. So my thing was, if the person making the decision has been so wrong, why does he get to make it again? Whoever the other two coaches were. And so here we are. And so all we can do is say, let's see what happens. Let's see. Hopefully, Nick and Demeco can work well together. Hopefully, at first everything's a honeymoon, right? Until you really get into the marriage. But hopefully it will. And hopefully in his deal, Demeco got enough autonomy so that he can do what needs to be done to be successful. And that's what I hope for him and for the team. I cover the team. I'm a journalist and I'm objective, but I'm a Houstonian, right? So I'd like to see this team be competitive, be successful, and by one day get to a Super Bowl. I think that's what we all want for the teams that we grew up watching. Well, I didn't grow up watching them. I grew up watching the Oilers, but you know what I mean. So I want to see them do well. It's just better for all of us in the city, and it's definitely better for what I do, which is this show every week.
Right. Now, I want to thank you again for coming on and giving us kind of the inside information and sharing your insight. If you can, let everyone know where they can find you on social media and where they can find your show as well.
Sure. Always thanks for having me. I know it was kind of tough trying to get scheduled, so thank you for your patience. I always appreciate you inviting me and sharing your platform. If you follow me on Twitter at Kim Y. Davis or on Instagram at Kim Y. Davis Media, Facebook, Kim Y. Davis Media, and my show on YouTube is called Chalk Talk. It's Kim Y. Davis Media, or is it Chalk Talk? I can't even remember. I have so many platforms. But if you follow me at Kim Y. Davis, you'll always get an update and notification about the show. It's live every Tuesday at 11 a.m. And then throughout the week, I do other things. In fact, next week, I'll be out covering the Super Bowl. So from Wednesday through Monday, I'll be in Arizona doing updates. I won't do my show from there. I'll do my show before I leave. But I'll get a lot of content for the show and do, a lot of live hits from Arizona. So it's a busy time. And tune in. I'd love for you guys to, follow the show and be a part of the audience.
Well, I thank you again for coming on. You're going to see a lot of people that I know out there. I'll probably give you a list of people I know that are going to be out there. But thank you again for coming on. Thank you again for sharing your knowledge. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Touring the AFC South with your host, Mike Patton. We're out.